Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you all for taking the time to join us for today's webinar, Busting Myths About Cash Recycling in the U.S. My name is Karen Redfern, and I'd like to welcome you all and cover a few housekeeping items. Today's presentation is being recorded. This recording will be made available for replay to those who are not able to attend this live session. If you object to participating in a recorded session, you may disconnect from the webinar now or at any time. The recorded link and presentation deck will be distributed tomorrow via email, and you may listen to the entire replay at a later time. All phone lines will be muted during the webinar. Questions may be submitted at any time through the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Please use the Q&A feature to send your questions to all panelists. At the conclusion of the session, we will have a final poll question for you as well. So if you could please take the time to answer the poll, your participation is appreciated. Today, your moderator is Scott Anderson, software expert and brand evangelist who ensures connection point between you, our customers, and the Diebold Nixdorf brand. I would now like to introduce Scott, Diebold Nixdorf's Senior Director of Evangelism. Scott joined the company in 2000 as Director of Strategic Accounts for banking software. In the 2 decades since, he has traveled the globe engaging with financial institutions on their omni-channel strategies, software implementation, and projects. Prior to joining Diebold Nixdorf, Scott spent 12 years across various branch, call center, product, and retail distribution strategy roles and at a top chartered bank in Canada. He is a software expert and Diebold Nixdorf brand evangelist dedicated to customer-focused software solutions. Welcome, Scott, and I will now turn the presentation over to you.
Helps if you unmute. Thanks so much, Karen. Setting the stage here, cash recycling at the ATM in the American market has been a widely debated topic. On today's webinar, we've assembled a few thought leaders who will share with you some statistics and ideas and hopefully debunk some perceptions in the industry, especially here in the US. Some of the myths and legends aren't necessarily true anymore based on what's possible in today's environment. I'm pleased to be joined by 2 colleagues who have a wealth of knowledge on the subject. First, I'd like to introduce Thomas Schulze. He's an industry specialist who has amassed broad international experience spanning Europe, Asia Pacific, and the Americas with several multi-year assignments. Thomas joined the company in 2001 and has always held close contact to customers, which helped him to develop a comprehensive understanding of market and customer needs. Thomas has had various roles spanning marketing, business development, key account management, and sales leadership. And now he leads the regional systems team in the Americas, building the interface between our sales organizations and our product groups. Thomas and I are also joined by Jim Flannery. With over 20 years of experience with Diebold Nixdorf, Jim has worked with hundreds of banks and credit unions on delivery network strategy development. As a trusted advisor, he is an expert in consumer behavior and channel planning initiatives for the financial services industry. Prior to joining Diebold Nixdorf, Jim worked in advertising and has held various call center and help desk reporting positions with SoftBank Group and ClientLogic. Welcome, gentlemen. Let's take a look at the agenda for today. We're going to focus on establishing some foundational thinking around the case for cash recycling, and then talk about ways you can plan for your cash automation journey. Finally, I'll wrap up with a few parting thoughts on why today the US is in a perfect spot to embark on the recycling journey. At the conclusion of the official content, we'll open it up for questions. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Thomas.
Thank you very much, Scott. So in the next 15 minutes or so, I'd like to give you a little bit of context why self-service and cash automation are critical pillars for financial institutions and their digital strategy today, and then also how this relates to building the case for cash recycling, specifically in the US. So first, I believe it's no news to you that mobile usage grows everywhere. Today, people spend about a day per week online, and that translates into 3 hours per day, and this mostly happens on smartphones. At the same time, we see that cash in circulation still grows in most of the economies, and projections show that this will remain relevant despite the strong increase in digital transactions that we see. So as a matter of fact, today, still 77% of all payment transactions are made in cash. So what we see here is that cash plays a significant role and still plays a significant role in today's digital world. And as long as cash is and will be available, the ATM channel remains a critical touch point. So in fact, one could even say that ATMs as physical touch points are mission critical because they can be the enabler and connection point for your consumer's digital experience. Or in other words, they build the bridge between the physical and the digital world. So I'd like to ask you to look at the ATM and the self-service channel in two ways. On one hand, look at the what the ATM channel can be beyond what it is today to you and your organization. Like today, it's mainly being an extension or sometimes even a replacement of the branch. Look at it beyond it and look at it like the face of your brand and the primary touch point to your brand. On the other hand, also recognize new opportunities where the ATM can reduce costs and drive more efficiencies across your self-service network, while integrating it more seamlessly into your entire banking ecosystem. So, and here the ATM becomes a key tool in enhancing your brand perception by bridging, as I mentioned earlier, the physical and the digital worlds. So on one hand, it gives you access, it gives your customers access to financial services, but it can also extend the digital capabilities and the digital experience of your customers at the ATM. Like, for example, if you would add a mobile pre-staging solution for a cash withdrawal to the current transaction set at the ATM. It's a relatively simple enhancement, but it goes a long way and is the perfect beginning of the digital journey of your clients. So with this in mind, we would think that, or we think that a self-service strategy can be anchored around three pillars: the cash automation, the aspect of journey thinking, and then of course also the cost aspect, reducing the total cost of ownership in the ATM channel. So looking a little bit at the first point, we believe that self-service should and is the primary vehicle for automating your cash process. So probably most of you are experiencing constant budget pressure or cost pressure to reduce cost related to the bank's physical footprints in terms of branch size, locations, placement of ATMs, where do we open, where do we close locations. Everything is impacting the business model. And self-service and ATMs are one asset that you have in this context to achieve a right-sizing approach while your branch model evolves. So if we look at ATMs as transaction enablers or ATMs to enable transaction migration, they can also extend the transaction set for your consumers and of course automate your cash processes. So here the ATMs become a tool to extend your branch or act as a tool in the branch, or they can even act as a branch in locations where fully blown branch setups may no longer be viable. The second aspect, the journey thinking. So by journeys, we think about bringing someone from point A to point B while providing the best and most seamless experience. And this includes your consumers, also your small, medium business customers, but also your staff. I'd like to give you an example of a poll that we took at a recent Diebold Nixdorf customer event, where we asked our delegates there to identify which are the trends they see as most critical today, and more than 50% answered that or voted for the top trend is removing friction from the customer journey. And we will talk about the journey and the customer journey in a little bit in more detail. The third topic is the cost reduction aspect. And here we see, or we look at it from the aspect that as long as there is cash in the system, of course, it is kind of costly if you do not manage it correctly. That means cash management is cost intensive, including the transportation, handling interest charges specifically for inactive cash. That means it's no news to you that if it's too little cash or too much cash in the system, both is not ideal and both creates various aspects of cost. And here cash recycling, specifically also in conjunction with a cash management system, are really a great help to reduce these costs in the ATM channel. So if we look at the next slide, there we go. We'd like to take a closer look at the cash automation journey, and we basically would like to divide this here into 4 steps. From teller to teller automation, then the next step from teller automation to self-service adoption, then to cash recycling adoption at the self-service point, and then even a step further, we can think about new operating models, partnerships, and as-a-service business models. So going a little bit into the details, the step 1, teller automation and cash recycling at the teller. So here we can see that over the past years, the teller experience has dramatically evolved for the clients. Today, TCRs, teller cash recyclers, are able to automate about 90% of the transactions that we see at the teller, which means it's on one hand a faster service for our clients, more convenient, a better service experience, but still we maintain the human factor by human interaction of the consumer with the teller. So, and this in many cases is still a key element in the banks or financial institutions' strategy to interact with their consumers and to provide a tool for customer satisfaction. If we look at RBR, the researcher, TCRs, so teller cash recyclers, account now for almost 80% of all teller assist units in the market, and the installed base here is still growing. And we see a variety of formats. So the classical teller operated solution can also be a consumer operated solution with assisted teller, with teller assistance, or the teller unit can even be more integrated in the branch environment with a roaming staff that helps, by example, supported with a tablet to perform transactions at the device. So moving one step further from teller to self-service, we see even more benefits here. On one hand, in terms of cost, if we just look at comparing the cost, a teller transaction can cost as much as $4 US. Self-service comes at a fraction of that price or of that cost, while still enhancing or extending the consumer access time. So it means an ATM is available 24/7. We give our consumers, our customers, access to cash withdrawals, also the possibility to do deposits 24/7 without the limitation of branch business hours. And in addition here, your tellers, your freed up tellers have a better opportunity for relationship building and of course increase customer retention. The step further then from self-service to cash recycling is something that we have been seeing developing all over the globe, all over the world, and I'll give you some examples in a minute. Looking at it from the cost perspective, today, cash deposits on average account for more than 50% of the cash handling efforts in the branch. So this means if we look at automizing these transactions, this is one big factor in reducing your cash management costs. And here, technology, cash recycling technology can be the next lever for this. And this ranges from simple solutions to very intelligent systems in a cash recycling scenario, where in the ideal world, your customers replenish your ATMs for free, provide the cash that is withdrawn by your consumers. And this closed cash cycle in the system makes the deposited cash available, and by this enable you to significantly reduce workload and thus also your expenses. And in this environment, the small and medium business clients, and of course also others with huge cash deposit volumes, but specifically the small, medium business clients play a significant role. As long as we are able to successfully direct this customer group to using the new technology, we can ensure a steady flow of cash into our systems that we need to refill them for the withdrawals. So, here, if we would combine this then, as I mentioned earlier, with innovative software or end-to-end cash management solutions, we at the same time can also guarantee audit compliance and a maximum transparency for all cash inventories. So on one hand, this helps you to transform the journey of your branch staff. On the other hand, also enhances the journey of your business customers tremendously. I don't want to go too much into the fourth step, the new operating models like the partnerships and as a service models. Just real quick, so what we see here is that organizations, financial institutes are looking for industry partnerships that help them with ATM white labeling concepts or as a service models for cash as a service, for instance. So if we look now on a little bit on the world map here, we can find very successful cash recycling scenarios pretty much all around the globe. It is a little different in the US, and this is why we are together here today. So in the US, the cash adoption, the cash recycling adoption has not really started, but I would like to give you some context how it is in other regions of the world. So if we look at the time frame from 2013 to 2017, on a worldwide scale, and when I say worldwide scale, this covers the 64 major ATM markets, cash recycling adoption has been increased by 76% from 2013 until today. And of course, the adoption rates vary a little bit. If we look at countries like Japan, we can today see that almost every ATM is cash recycling enabled. China, already more than 40% cash recycling. And then the two examples from Europe, like Turkey or Germany, we are also sitting in this 30 to 40% adoption rate. And this all did not happen overnight. This is a process that I would like to explain to you a little bit more in detail on the next few pages. So on the example of Germany, in Germany, we have about 58,000 ATMs installed base, and today 42% are equipped with cash recycling technology. And in the last 6 years, this number doubled. So, but looking back, cash recycling in Germany started already more than 20 years ago. And you can see on this graphic on the left side that the deposit volume increased significantly over the last 10, 12 years. So here I've brought a example from Sparkasse Paderborn, which gives us a good average in terms of representing these numbers. So Sparkasse Paderborn has a branch network of 56 locations, fully equipped branches, and then 21 more self-service locations. They have today 51 cash recyclers installed, which represents 38% of their total installed base of ATMs. And this is pretty much representing the average in Germany. So this is why I thought this is a good example for you to share a little bit more in detail. So, and at this Sparkasse Paderborn, the savings bank in Germany, they have been using cash recycling for the last 17 years. And I have brought some numbers. So since 2008, they were able to reduce their teller transactions by more than half, and at the same time added 2 million transactions to the self-service channel. And with this migration from the teller to the self-service, they were able to save 35 full-time employees. And if you look at the cash deposit rate at the recyclers, they increased this by 133% from 2008 to today. So here we see that the transaction migration from the teller to the self-service is really proving very successful. And there is even potential for more optimization. So we did some tests and pilots with the Sparkasse, and by moving to the latest recycling technology, they would be even able to reduce the costs further by an average 2 CIT stops per month per cash recycling ATM. So what I mentioned already, it is important that this cash recycling in introduction is a process, and it will not happen overnight. So it takes far more than just deploying the technology. And the financial institutions in the countries where this has been deployed, like Germany, went through a learning curve. So in the early days, one aspect that was underestimated was, for example, the need for education and guidance. So education is very important, twofold. On one hand, for your consumers, because they have to trust the technology. They are moving away from a well-known teller booth, are now asked to perform a deposit transaction, and for the SMB, small medium business clients, that would mean a deposit transaction with a big bundle of notes with a huge amount of money. They are asked to do this on their own. So they need to understand the benefits. They need to understand why this is why this process provides enhanced security for them, what other benefits this brings, like automatic crediting of the deposited amount to their accounts. And also, I mean, it starts like teaching the clients and guiding them to how to put a bundle of 300 notes correctly into an ATM so that it guarantees a proper and smooth processing. And equally important is the proper training of your staff. So your team members also need to understand and get used to the new technology, especially for those of you where you provide the first line maintenance on your own and also do some aspects of the cash processes on your own. Just to put a little bit in context also the technology perspective. So Diebold Nixdorf, for example, we have now experience for more than 20 years in cash recycling. The technology has advanced and matured, is much more reliable than the very first generation 20 years ago, is much more forgiving, which results, of course, in greater availability for your whole network. So just remember, recycling is not a quick win. This is an ongoing process of improvement. You can start small with a pilot, and we are there to help you doing that with specific programs to help educate your staff, to help educate your consumers, and to make sure we bring them and you all on a very seamless and successful journey. So let's translate this a little bit into the US, and Jim will go much more into detail in a minute. But what we hear in many instances in the US is like, yeah, we see that recycling works over in Europe or in Asia, but the US is different. We have all these $1 bills that people want to deposit, but no one wants to withdraw them from an ATM. We have all this amount of checks. We have the back ends not harmonized for deposits and withdrawals, et cetera, But if we look at some facts that we are putting together here, the technology has advanced, and in fact, today we can provide you capacities in an ATM, in a recycling ATM, to deal with this overflow, for example, of the $1 notes, or we can deal very reliably with low quality currency. And even if we look at the currency quality of the US banknotes, today 9 out of 10 banknotes are fit for recycling. And if we look at the cash in, cash out ratio in the market, we believe that about 30% of all terminals in the US provide a cash in, cash out ratio that supports the recycling business case. And as I mentioned, Jim will talk much more in depth about this. And looking a little bit at your small, medium business customers, which are very relevant for your cash deposits, and also in most cases a very profitable customer segment for most of you. More than half of them today is unhappy with spending time in the queue at the end of a long day to get rid of their cash. and far more than 1/3 is unhappy with the time that it takes for their deposits to show up on their accounts. And 75% of your merchants would use automated self-service technology for their daily deposits and withdrawals because they believe it will enhance their journey and make their experience a smoother one. So now imagine with self-service recycling, you're not only creating a situation where you can make your channel more efficient or create leaner cash processes. At the same time, you're also creating a situation where you improve your customer satisfaction. And I have brought 2 examples here of 2 US banks who strongly believe in the feasibility of self-service cash recycling. One is GTE out of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and the other one is One Nevada out of Las Vegas. And GTE began transforming their branches in 2014 by pulling out the traditional teller lines and the night drops and deploying new ITMs, interactive teller machines, inside of their branches. So this means 2 years later, in 2016, they were 100% transformed away from teller, no more tellers. So they transformed completely to these interactive teller machines. They also see strong volume of cash deposits at the drive-thrus and the walk-up ATMs. And this relates into about 50% of their fleet requiring 4 CIT visits per week to sweep the machines, and almost a dozen of the machines require 6 or more stops. So this is a great scenario to look for cash recycling. And the One Nevada example is a little bit similar. So they have 49 ATMs located within the Las Vegas area, with a huge amount of cash coming into these units, some even taking $1 million per terminal per week. And here, since they are completely automated or with their cash, they also do not have any more teller lines. They also believe strongly that cash recycling is the right way to go because the benefits are just far too great to be ignored. And with this, I would like to hand over to Jim, who will go with you more in detail now on the US situation.
Sorry, I was on mute there. So, as Thomas mentioned, we get to speak to many FIs throughout North America on a weekly basis, and whenever we talk or ask about self-service recycling, we tend to get the same kind of responses. Where I think a lot of the banks and credit unions still believe that their volumes and their mix of notes coming in isn't at the point where recycling would work. So when you think of the most common responses, the volumes have to be high, you need an equal mix of in and out. And a lot of FIs really looking more at, mobile's where we're seeing an increase in deposits. So we're really gonna double down on investing on that channel instead. So to take a deeper look at the the reasons on why we think recycling makes more sense now, to elaborate a little bit on what Thomas said is, more cash is coming in now than we've ever seen at the ATM within the North American market. So, for years, consumers were okay with imaging checks through the ATM for deposits, but cash was always that last, kind of transaction that they held down to, and were a little hesitant to deposit at the ATM. Well, we're finally seeing those cash limits increase as a lot of FIs have seen, pretty big migration rates of transactions going from the teller line to self-service. Yeah, I think also is this, the continual need to control costs and reduce the expense of transactions within the environment. So when you think of location-based channels, we've seen, banks be pretty good at reducing headcount when they're getting migration. But one of the things that has always been, somewhat of an expensive part that, needs extra management was this idea of cash handling, or CIT. So recycling, helps solve for that by reducing the dependency upon multiple runs per week to fill and sweep machines. I think a more interesting one we also have seen is the demand for denomination selection. So when you think of the consumer and their choices when they're withdrawing money from an ATM are pretty limited for most banks. So the idea of being able to offer multiple denominations becomes intriguing when you have those denominations coming in through deposits. So potentially having other people's deposits being your source of funding for denomination selection. And then finally, as we mentioned before, while 9 out of 10 notes are fit for recycling, it doesn't necessarily mean that we want to offer all those for dispensing. So the newer machines have more capacity, which also provides us with a lengthening sweep cycle for those types of transactions. So, as I mentioned before, overall, what most FIs are seeing trend-wise at the ATM is check deposits going down, mainly for two reasons. Fewer checks are being written, but more significantly is the movement of checks to mobile capture. So most consumers are using that for a majority of their check deposits, which is reducing the number of checks that we're seeing come in through the ATM. But at the same time, we see a double-digit increase in cash deposits. So as I mentioned before, we do lots of research on the consumer's attitude toward different channel options, and cash has always been one that people are a little slow to adopt at the ATM. But we're finally seeing, that increase that's making it more acceptable for the recycling environment to operate correctly. From a denomination selection standpoint, again, overwhelmingly, we see the consumer's demand for that is strong across all regions within the US. I would assume this is also true in Canada. So being able to offer that is certainly going to become a table stake offering that most consumers are expecting from their FI. They no longer want to have to get money from the teller if they want something specific, or have to make change somewhere else if they're only offered 20s. When you think of denomination selection, we do see the highest demand for 10s, and as you can see on this chart, we did compare the overall US population to the youth segment as well, just to see if there were any differences there. So overwhelmingly, if you're looking at denomination selection, at least what our research is showing, that 5s and 10s right now are by far the most interested from the consumer standpoint. But you also see demand for some of the higher notes, and even a handful that are looking for 1s. So when we're talking with banks and credit unions about recycling and their plans for it, I think a lot of the institutions struggle with understanding where it makes sense to do it, what's the implementation order that we should be looking at, and what's the potential payback or business case for doing this conversion to recycling. So we have a process, and I'm not going to read this to you word by word, but hitting on the main things is really understanding the data that's required to do this analysis. So we've done this for a handful of institutions across the US and Canada, and what we're seeing is the data is there. You have to be able to organize it in a way that allows for basically a simulation of what we think would happen if recycling was implemented on a certain subset or the entire network of an ATM fleet. So really looking at removing certain sweeps or CIT visits from a cycle and quantifying that information and monetizing it in for the ROI. And what we're hoping to see is that there's certain trends or patterns that fall out that we can more easily point to, that gives the FI some direction on where we think the most impact will be. as Thomas mentioned earlier, we've done this analysis for several FIs already, and we're seeing somewhere between 30–35% of the terminals are falling into a category that we would consider to be good fits for recycling. So for example, when we do this work, what we're really looking at is what's the impact of reduction in either sweeps, which we'll call is when you're actually physically taking cash out of the machine that has been deposited, versus the replenishment activity that CIT, or in some cases branch staff, is doing. So what we're hoping to do is find locations where we can remove, if not one, several visits per week from that cycle, and see what happens from the cash levels across the different denominations that are being offered. So basically testing the cash levels on a daily basis to understand, are we getting close to a point where we may have too much or too little cash within that cassette that will either run out or fill up in the next 24 hours. So it's not uncommon to see a subset of locations that just won't work, right? You'll have locations that may have just an imbalance that's too difficult to overcome, where you just can't seem to get rid of the cash quick enough that's coming in. Or in some cases, it may be a terminal that just doesn't see cash coming in. We just have a location that is a heavy cash out type of location, maybe a seasonal place or something that's near a entertainment district that just sees a lot of withdrawals and not necessarily the reciprocal cash coming in. I know this is a little bit of an eye chart, but looking at a typical simulated exercise for a terminal over a 5-week period shows how we would determine what a location would look like from a good fit perspective. So in this instance, kind of quickly summarize, we're looking at the in and out of 4 different denominations in the current scenario, and then looking at what recycling effect may have on that if we are to start removing the number of times we're servicing this particular machine. So in this instance, we're able to reduce 2 replenishes per week and 1 sweep per week, and in essence not affect the cash levels from a consumer's standpoint of running out or becoming full and not being able to accept any more deposits. Yeah, as I mentioned before, you are going to have terminals in your network that are just bad fits. So ones that, regardless of what's happening from a recycling standpoint, you will not be able to change your CIT schedule. So in this example, this FI had lots of 1s, 5s, and 10s coming in, but they weren't planning on dispensing those. So you see the bins filling up quicker because those denominations are not going out, and at the same time, a run on 50s, which was driving the lower limit down on that particular denomination as well. So when we're helping FIs with this, we simulate every terminal in their network and flag them as being high, moderate, or low from the standpoint of their fitness level and the ability to recycle. So beyond just understanding the analytics and which locations make sense, there's other considerations that the bank has to take into account when they're looking at a recycling rollout. I think first and foremost is transaction migration. I think a lot of banks have done a pretty good job of getting customers to use self-service for deposits, but how does that compare to the industry overall? What kind of campaigns are in place to possibly promote more usage of the ATM for deposits? As I said before, it seems that when check imaging was rolled out, banks were really on board with marketing and lobby management. And now with cash becoming more important, we're hoping to see the same type of marketing activity occur to really promote that and remind the consumer that you can deposit cash at the ATM as well. The next consideration is really looking at the broader cash management cycle. So, for a lot of FIs, when CIT is visiting a branch to service the ATMs, they may also be taking care of the vault cash or the teller cash. So how does that fit together? What other cash management solutions need to be part of that conversation to make sure that we're getting the most for our money? In some cases, maybe the branch vault cash will preclude a location from allowing a reduction in the CIT schedule. As I mentioned before, denomination selection, offering things beyond 20s is going to be important. Certainly making sure that what you're offering is congruent with what your consumers are looking for. We did see slight regional differences in what people are looking for. West Coast, we saw a higher demand for larger bills, while Midwest and Southeast, we saw a higher demand for smaller bills. So making sure that we're recycling denominations that make sense from the consumer standpoint and fit into the denomination selection. And then finally, the whole idea of return on investment. So how are we measuring success, and what does that mean from the standpoint of which machines does it make sense to do this at, and which ones should you forego? Looking at the different components of it, understanding that beyond the hard cost savings, are there additional soft benefits that need to be part of that overall rationalization? At this point, I'm going to hand it back over to Scott.
Thanks very much, Jim, and thanks, Thomas. Lots of compelling rationale here for recycling. As I think about the American marketplace, I do believe the timing is right to consider recycling, and the solution set is certainly mature and proven, as both of you have outlined. Experience has shown us that other markets started out with a very pragmatic stepping stone approach, and I think this sets a really great blueprint and has paved the way for recycling as a viable option in the US. So I want to kind of just summarize with a couple of key points here as we look at recycling going forward. I think it's really important to note that technology is already here today and proven to support this initiative. If you think about cash controls and data at the device level, the ATM is always that record of truth, and that's really fundamental and foundational for cash recycling data analysis and understanding. So the aggregation, interpretation, and dissemination of all that data around cash counts starts at the ATM. And it's a matter of how we use that data to make informed decisions, as Jim has outlined. If you couple this with some of the major advancements in the cash capacities that we're seeing in these new devices and the acceptance and dispense efficiencies, along with those strong migration of deposits of cash to the self-service channel, I think it's really compelling to start looking at the business case in a different way. What I believe a lot of the myths around being able to support this in the American space today is around how do I handle this at the switch level, how do I make changes to be able to support my cash counts. I think it's important to note that the ATM world is changed, and gone are the days where we're really limited to what the switch allows us to do with the ATM. We have a lot more open connections, more robust communications, higher intelligence in the box that really gives us that ability to leverage the data and make more informed decisions around cash dispense, cash counts, and take the opportunity to actually get more aggressive with how we manage the cash floats in those ATMs. And that kind of lends itself to a total operational view where we're looking at the entire cash ecosystem of a branch environment, spanning self-service devices, maybe even branch cash teller recycling units, and also the consumer interactions between those, and using data analytics, artificial intelligence, and monitoring to help us with some of that data. As Jim had pointed out, there's a lot to think about here, but with the right data and these new types of technologies, the modeling can show that cash recycling can work. It sort of lends itself to the middle column here, sort of step 2, which is improving the experience for those who have some of those highest cash demands in the marketplace today. And as Thomas had pointed out, they tend to be our highest profit segments, the small and medium business initiatives. And really, if we look at automating routine large volume transactions, I think there's a win there for the business owner. They're happier. They're spending less time lining up in a branch or sending some of their staff to line up on their behalf. They've got more availability of being able to release their cash into the system and gain instant credit for that and leverage the balances of their cash deposits. But I think the FI can also realize some significant benefits here and release and repurpose some really high cost capacity, be it tellers, be it footprint in a branch, from business teller wickets and refocus on service and sales. And finally, none of us really have the crystal ball to see what the Fed's going to do as far as interest rates are concerned, but the cost of cash today is pretty low, but that can easily change. And I think if we start looking at ways where we can reduce inactive cash, cash held in cassettes, and turn all of that cash into active cash across the branch ecosystem, this will really optimize the cost of cash on hand. But it's not just treasury costs we need to think about. Cash handling, dual custody, multiple accounts, balancing, cash in transit, all of these costs that we have in the system today can benefit from recycling. So seemingly small steps to automate and close the cash loop with recycling can have dramatic effects. And we have an online calculator on dieboldnixdorf.com that can help you quantify high-level impacts to help you with your cash cycle optimization and recycling justification. Just as we're wrapping up too on the main content, don't forget you can also learn more about the importance of self-service and cash automation benefits from our latest industry guide, if you haven't downloaded it, called Self-Service Reloaded. And you can gain immediate access to that by visiting dieboldnixdorf.com/drive-ROI to download your own copy. And you will also receive a copy of that in your thank you email following this webinar. At this point, I'd like to open it up for questions, but before we do so, I'm going to turn it back to Karen for a brief moment.
Thanks so much, Scott. I do just have a quick poll that I would like to launch here. So if those of you on the line would like to express interest in scheduling a conversation with our experts about cash automation strategy and recycling, please go ahead and indicate that now. I'm not going to share the results, but I'll just allow you to answer, and we will get your request over to someone to follow up with you at the conclusion of the webinar. Also, just a reminder, I do see we have had a couple of questions come in, but if any of you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A feature and submit those questions now to all panelists, and we'll do our best to get to all of the questions that have come in. If there are any questions we don't get to on the call here today, we will follow up after the webinar and get in touch with you with any answers to any questions that you might have. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end this now and turn it back over to Scott here in a moment.
Great. Thanks, Karen. We have one question that's come in already. What type of features do cash recyclers have that will aid in handing over cash in the event of a robbery? Thomas, perhaps you can address that question.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I believe this might point more on the teller cash recyclers. So for teller cash recyclers, there are features like a time delay that can be implemented that basically make sure that in the case of a robbery, the ATM or the teller cash recycler just doesn't function anymore and doesn't give access to the cash to anyone. If we look at securing the cash at a self-service cash recycler, the security features of a self-service cash recycler can be compared with what you know today from the likes as a full function ATM.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Thomas. Another couple of questions have come in. Can you expand on the hardware availability and any barriers to usage outside of switch changes? Thomas, that probably also belongs to you as an initial response.
For the hardware availability in the US, we have a family of ATMs available that we have already deployed in the US. So products are available, and we are working on making these even more fitting to the US market in terms of where kind of the technology meets the requirements from the environment, like dealing with these volume of $1 notes, dealing with these overflow volumes. So this is a good topic that we would like to follow up. If you are, if you would like to, we would like to follow up with you on a one-on-one conversation.
Perfect, thanks. Over to you, Jim. A question has come in. Initial conversations have been held around some express cash recyclers. Is the technology that we installed in their branches, would this allow branches to save time eventually and reduce the FTE?
For ECRs, are you asking, or are we?
Yeah, it looks like it's ECRs specifically here.
Yeah. So when we look at helping FIs with determining the appropriate number of ECRs and what the impact is, a big chunk of the ROI is around FTE reduction. So in most scenarios, what we are seeing that, coming out of lab data that we have from various institutions is, the speed in which the ECRs can count cash should allow 2 tellers to do the same workflow as 3. So you basically get a half FTE reduction, or I guess a 50% reduction FTE for that deployment. So assuming you have 3 FTE, you can get rid of 1, put 1 ECR in that they would share, and that would be enough to financially rationalize that investment.
Great. And there was a similar question actually, or a related question earlier around, is there a webinar to talk about TCRs or ECRs? I think we'll take that offline and get back to you, unless, Jim, you have any references that you can think of where we can point people right away. Yeah, I mean, we do lots of that. So if a person wants to contact us directly, I'm sure we can get a hold of you and we can talk about that in detail. Okay. Other questions have come in. Anything else coming? There's one here. If we look at, our current deployment of hardware, Syneos, 35K dispense and the 6K deposit, what's the performance comparison there? Thomas, it's probably one for you.
So I would say, if we look at the specifications, of course, self-service cash recycler is a little bit of a different concept than a traditional full function ATM. So we have higher capacities in the cassettes. We have higher capacities in the bundles that we can process. Overall, if we look at the performance in terms of speed or the customer availability of the unit, we are looking at the same or better performance than the Syneos.
Perfect. Other questions? One that has come in, Jim, perhaps you can address this. What do you feel the primary reason is why recycling has had a slow start or adoption rate in the US so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it just has to do with the lack of analytics that has been around to support it. I think, in my opinion, some of the FIs are looking for, a model or some sort of idea of what needs to be, what that scenario needs to look like in order for recycling to work. So I think, a lot of it may just has to be with, being able to understand what data needs to be looked at and how the decisioning has to be based upon the analytics that supports it. But I think, as I mentioned before, a lot of it has to do with the lack of consumer adoption of cash deposits, which I think we're past now. I think the younger consumers are much more comfortable with that, and now it's just a matter of which locations have that proper volume and mix.
Interesting. Okay, great. Another follow-up question on the ECR topic, but I think it's more broad. Are there other technologies that we should be considering outside of the ECR if there's a goal to reducing FTE and gaining efficiencies in the branches? Perhaps both of you can address that, both from a hardware and a people process perspective.
Yeah, maybe I start. So I think from a hardware perspective, it's all about the combination of the right systems, like mapped to your individual locations and your individual situation of the cash in, cash out ratio. We can exactly come up with a suggestion of how to combine cash recycling enabled ATMs, maybe with still some traditional full function devices. And here, I think it's worth looking at the individual locations and going a little bit into this analytical approach that Jim explained earlier to come up with recommendations. But the short answer would be yes, certainly there are other systems and system types and technologies than ECRs.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think, Scott, you hit a good point there. I think a lot of it has to do with people and process as well. So when you look at a typical branch teller volume, 65% should be migratable to self-service that you already have. So a lot of it has to do with what you're doing in the branches from a lobby management perspective, how you're promoting digital channels to your consumers. We're in lots of branches when we do our consulting work, and we see consumers standing in line to deposit checks, right? So why are we still doing that? Why aren't these consumers being educated on what their options are and how to do that maybe more efficiently? So I think there's quite a bit that's already in place. It just needs to be optimized, and that has to do with really campaigns around customer experience, lobby management, and in some cases incenting your branch staff to be the front line for that migration.
Great. And Jim, to your point here, I think as you talk about that and the people process parts of it, as well as implementing the actual technology, a good question was raised. How long would a rollout of a pilot take? What is sort of the timeline around this, and can we start today?
Yeah, I mean, the easy answer is that that depends. I mean, there's usually a good 4 to 6 weeks of analytics that would have to occur. So really digging in on the data for either the branches that are under consideration for a new pilot, and making sure that there's ample time to train the staff on what their role is in that deployment. So it's not necessarily just dropping a new piece of technology into the lobby. It's explaining to the staff how it works, get them to use it, get them comfortable with it, making sure that it becomes part of their daily onboarding process of new customers or lobby management. As I mentioned before, I'm a big proponent of that, getting people out there that are willing to intercept people as they're approaching the teller line and show them, demonstrate how that works. So it is a process. I mean, I think a quick answer, you're looking at it easily a 6 to 12 month effort. But certainly, depending upon what's in place currently and what needs to occur on the back operations end, it could be longer.
So Thomas, from my perspective, from software capabilities today, how we support it operationally is to be defined based on the unique requirements of the FI. But I'd say software and systems are ready today that could support recycling in the American market. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree.
One other question that has come in, it's around interactive teller machines versus smart ATM usage, and is there a real advantage of interactive teller versus the ATM? I'll start with a comment from my perspective, and I believe there can be good advantages for ITM as a educational piece for specific use cases where perhaps we have an unidentified non-card, non-PIN transaction, or perhaps there's a business rule or an exception that needs to be handled. But really, a smart ATM can handle all of that. And I think with proper business rules and applications, it's really a variety of those types of use cases that can be supported based on the location and the objectives that we're trying to achieve. So I don't really see one as having an advantage over the other. I think it's really around what are the specific consumer demands at those individual touch points, and how do we fulfill their journeys in the specific use cases where interactive teller can be a part of that, or smart ATM with business rule, and perhaps it's an override programmatically. There's ways that we can get around that. And I think if we're looking at larger volume cash transactions, the recycling component obviously makes best sense here, because then we're not having to push those transactions over the counter. Jim, Thomas, anything you'd want to add to that?
I think, Scott, you covered it pretty comprehensive already. Nothing to add from my side.
Yeah, the one thing about video that I'll mention is, I think a lot of times you have to look at the demographics of your customer base and really understand, what it is that they're looking for. So what we find in our research is that often, the people that say they're okay with using a pure self-service, an ATM for a transaction, are also the same ones that would use video. So, making sure that the right transactions are offered and you're not essentially, cannibalizing transactions that could migrate to self-service automatically, right? So making sure that we're offering something that's above and beyond what the typical ATM can already do.
Great, thanks, Jim. With that, we are at the top of the hour. If there are any remaining questions that we haven't addressed, we will respond to you in short order. But at this point, I'd like to thank my colleagues for sharing their insights, and I want to turn it back one more time to Karen to conclude our session.
Yes, thank you everyone for joining us today. Many thanks to you, Scott and Jim and Thomas, for taking the time out of your day to present. This is really some very valuable information, and hopefully everybody takes some of your key points back to their companies, to their coworkers for consideration. So just as one final reminder, we will send out the deck along with a link to the replay tomorrow. So keep an eye on your email inboxes for that email. Thank you again, everyone, and have a great day.